In this week's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Melissa Vogel, she, her, business anthropologist and corporate leader. She founded the business anthropology program at Clemson University and has a consulting practice called Great Heron Insights with her partner, Erica Vogel, who is also on this show. This week, our conversation is about breaking fashion barriers, rising wages, but not enough, theme parks ditching paperwork, TJ Maxx's inclusion win, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bernadette. Excited to be here.
It's a real treat. Will you please tell folks a little bit about yourself, and please tell us, what is a business anthropologist? I think everyone is probably dying to know what that is.
No, absolutely. I don't like to assume that people know even what an anthropologist is, much less a business anthropologist. And frankly, we have not been great about making sure that people do know what we do. So anthropologists study human cultures and belief systems around the world and over our entire existence as a species. In fact, there are even some anthropologists who study our evolution as a species. So we're the broadest and deepest of all the social scientists, which I think makes us particularly well suited to work in the DEI area, because we are trained to look for patterns of human behavior and bring a very holistic global perspective to everything we do. So just to give you a bit of an example, in the US, I think a lot of times folks start to think about DEI related activities as mostly maybe around race, or if you're lucky, maybe they think of gender or different sexual identities, but they often forget, for example, I recently worked in a large multinational corporation. They forget that we're not all from the United States, and there is a large group of international folks working at this company with me for whom their first language is not English. Right. And, we would have various trainings and programs that were very, well-intentioned and had good information, but they were completely US centric. Right. Yeah. And didn't take into account that international workforce at all. So I love, sort of trying to bring that perspective with me and sort of reminding folks about it, because I think the US, we can be particularly bad about forgetting that we're part of a larger world. The rest of the world, by the way, does not forget. It's just us that tends to forget. So I love sort of teaching people about the world around them and trying to thinking about it in what we call a culturally relative way, which means rather than just assuming that the way you and your culture does things is the best and only way, to actually try to understand the cultural logic behind other people's practices, beliefs, behaviors, and, what makes them tick and why does that make sense to them, instead of just superimposing our value judgments on them. So in the business world, we just bring all of that perspective, all of those methods, all of that theoretical underpinning to solving everyday business problems.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going with my next question is, what sort of function are you in? Or is it in human resources or learning and development, or where do business anthropologists live within an organization typically?
Yeah, so there's 3 major subfields of business anthropology. The 2 that I've done most of my work in so far are market research, so helping to understand customers and marketing products to them, and design anthropology. So that's where you get all the folks who are involved in user experience and who are working to improve the design of products and make them better suited to your customers. The area that actually fascinates me the most, and I've done some work in this area and actually would probably like to do more in this area, which is part of why I have my little consulting practice, is organizational culture. So, and that can be everything from like trying to make your workplace a safe and inclusive and welcoming environment, to just like improving your processes and making sure that people can actually get their work done in a productive and efficient way. And that's an area that I really feel like anthropologists need to expand their influence, because it's been really dominated by the psychological perspective of organizational behavior, which again tends to be very US centric and not take into account those cultural differences. So yeah, those are the three main areas. Now, what does that actually look like in a company? That means you see us in research. You do see us in HR. You could also see us in like product ownership type areas, but I think that's a little bit less common.
Okay. I think this is fascinating because, Melissa, one of the things I love to think about in DEI is this holistic approach, right? I mean, that's sort of the theme of my book, Inclusive 360. And a lot of what I've talked about in the newsletter is the stories that show up are not just about HR, they're about product development, they are about marketing and diversity and inclusion in a really holistic way. And so it seems like that is very much aligned with what the work of business anthropologists is. I love that. And so when I wrote about in my newsletter this week was how I think it's so important as we move forward in this industry is to really operationalize this work and to make sure that it is part of product development, to make sure that it is this sort of cultural anthropology lens. This has to be part of all of the functions, whether it's marketing, product development, obviously HR, to really make sure that it's operationalized so that it becomes the default so they can't take it away.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's fundamental if you are into design. I mean, that's fundamental to the principles of human-centered design, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
your like ultimate goal as a designer is, to achieve some kind of universal design that actually works for everyone. And the example that my wife and I love to throw around is cell phones, right? Because I don't have very big hands. And I absolutely hate the giant cell phones that are out nowadays because it's too big for my hand. It doesn't fit in my pocket. And I'm convinced that the people designing those are men with giant hands.
Yeah.
But at least I've noticed over time, they're starting to offer different sizes. So I can keep buying my smaller one, and then somebody who has giant hands can get the big one if that's more comfortable for them,
Exactly. Well, and of course, when there are products out there that are designed universally or designed with everyone's needs in mind, or having a diversity of size options, all of that, then they can sell more of them. And that's really the bottom line, literally, right?
Yep.
All right, Melissa, let's get into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from the British Fashion Council's Fashion Awards, where Alex Consani made history as the first openly transgender person to win Model of the Year. So Consani is a model with IMG Models and thanked Black trans women who paved the way for her success as part of her acceptance speech. Love it.
So this one was hard for me. I like that we're starting with, to me, the most controversial story in your newsletter this week.
Okay, let's bring it out.
Because even as an undergrad, so I've specialized in gender studies since my undergraduate years. And as part of my teaching of women's studies related courses, I have often talked about women's representation in the media. And it's generally been horrific, right? So I am not a huge fan of the fashion industry at large or modeling in particular.
Fair.
Right? It's generally not been like the safest and healthiest place for people, especially for women. So I was really torn because, as someone married to a trans woman, obviously, yay for representation, right? Like we need more representation in all areas of life. But do I feel like it's a huge achievement for a white, extremely skinny trans woman to have won this award? I kind of don't. Like, I want to see more women my size, and more women
Sure.
of color, and like folks
Yep.
from different backgrounds, folks who don't have a perfectly symmetrical face. You know what I mean? Like the companies who have deliberately added more diversity into their ad campaigns. I mean, I absolutely like deliberately go after buying from those brands to support that, and I
Mm-hmm.
love when in like, a clothes catalog, you see models of different sizes. So you can
Mm-hmm.
actually tell what might that outfit look like on someone like me, or, someone even a different shape from me, as opposed to just the same typical tall, skinny model upholding the white standard of beauty. So this was a tough one for me, but I'm glad we started with it. We can just get
No,
into the juicy part.
no, thank you for bringing that perspective. So this is a call to action, folks. Send me some stories because I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Because you know what? First of all, it has been harder to find stories lately. I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie about that, right? But you're absolutely right. It is a win for representation, and also, yeah, it's also sort of perpetuating a very specific standard of beauty.
But wonderful that she called out the actions of Black trans women that have helped her get there. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic. All right, well, let's move into another story, which, has some pros and cons as well. The second story is about how, as of January 1st, 22 US states will increase their minimum wage rates. So, states like California, Illinois, and New York will see moderate increases, while California is reaching $16.50 an hour, and Illinois and New York are about $15 and $15.50. Hawaii is going up $2 an hour, and some states like Arizona are less. But the federal minimum wage is $7.25. So thank goodness these states are doing something.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I mean, long overdue. Probably not enough. Um, but I again, it's like what I see happening is this continual widening of the gap between the red and the blue states,
Yeah,
right? I mean, look which states are the ones increasing the minimum wage,
that's right.
right? It's the same ones. And having lived 14 years in a very red state, South Carolina, that really sort of brought a whole new perspective, because I did go to college in blue areas, California, Philadelphia. And so having spent 14 years teaching at Clemson, it really brought a whole new perspective to my attention of the different opportunities that are not available in some of these places. And so on top of that they're not raising the minimum wage in a lot of the places that already have such disparity and lack of opportunities is an opportunity for us to continue moving this work forward. Because I believe we are seeing still at this point one of the widest gaps in income inequality across the United States at large in the history of our country. And of course, then when we break it down by gender and race and
Yeah.
sexual orientation, it gets even worse, right? You and I were talking earlier that there's been recent data showing that unfortunately the gender pay gap has not really improved in like 2 decades.
Yeah.
So, um, celebrate every win for sure,
Yep.
and then use it as inspiration to keep things moving forward.
Yes, and absolutely. That's right. Okay, the third story this week comes from Universal Parks in Florida and California, which has simplified their disability accommodation procedures by no longer requiring advance approval from a third party. So now visitors with disabilities can access the Attractions Assistance Pass directly through guest services upon arrival rather than needing a card 48 hours in advance. So it makes just streamline the process for folks.
Yeah, I mean, this was something I was so glad you brought this to our attention. I did not have any idea that this was such a hassle for
Yeah,
people. Um,
exactly.
when we took my parents to, I think it was Universal and Disney a few years ago with my son, my mom needed one of those little scooter things. And we didn't have to do anything in advance. It wasn't a problem. Like, it was very simple and easy. So the fact that like folks have had to go through this hassle in the past is crazy. So I'm glad that this is becoming easier, because again, not only should you not have to go through a big hassle just because you're differently abled, but things change, like somebody falls and hurts their ankle and now they need those accommodations, So yeah, absolutely. Make it easier on people.
Exactly. And it's good for everyone. Okay, the fourth story is from TJ Maxx, which is selling apparel designed and produced by autistic folks, thanks to a new partnership with Spectrum Designs, a nonprofit employing neurodivergent people. So the collaboration includes t-shirts with original designs and is available in over 700 stores nationwide, bringing the creativity to a much broader audience.
Yeah, I thought this was one of those just pure good news stories. Like, there's nothing about it that worries me. It just makes me happy, because there's a lot of talented folks out there that may be neurodivergent or otherwise differently abled, and I don't know how difficult it might be for them to get their products to market. So the fact that this nonprofit is working with TJ Maxx to help them have an avenue to do that is fantastic, and hopefully others will follow TJ Maxx example.
Yeah, exactly. There have been other brands I've showcased on the show before who have done a few things. We're seeing a lot more apparel brands now actually having adaptive designs, which is great as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last story this week is about Chase Strangio, who made history as the first known transgender person to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court last week. Chase was the lead attorney in ACLU's case against Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors. And the stakes are really high for families, doctors, and activists with this case. So really big deal. And again, the representation.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, being in a marriage with a trans person, I also happen to have a trans stepdaughter. This case is of crucial importance to me and my family. We are sort of watching it with bated breath. I know that the sort of prognosis so far is not 100% positive, but I just keep holding out hopes that the final result is going to be something either that we can live with or that we can fix. Because I'm not sure that at the moment it looks like it's going to be 100% in our favor. But I'm not giving up hope yet.
Yeah, we're not going to give up. I mean, it's a good vibes show, so we have to keep the hope, Melissa, right?
That's right.
I do like that the way you worded it, though. Something that we could potentially fix. Yeah, that matters. It does.
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the theme of the next 4 years is what damage gets done, but can we fix it?
Yeah.
Can we stave off the worst and then fix the rest?
Yeah. Well, one quote I want to share from Chase from the article is, "It is not lost on me that I will be standing there at the lectern at the Supreme Court in part because I was able to have access to the medical care that is the very subject of the case that we're litigating." So really, really impactful. All right, Melissa, it has been a real treat having you on the show. Let's move into this week's Good Vibes to Go. I'll share my good vibe to go, and then I'll invite you to share yours. So my good vibe to go is an episode of the How I Built This podcast featuring the story of Fawn Weaver and Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. So Fawn Weaver, you just got to listen to the show. It's very, very inspiring. Uncle Nearest is the first Black owned whiskey brand, and the show is just great for business nerds like me. Maybe it's not the first, but it's certainly the biggest, and it's a really inspiring show. So we'll put that in the show notes. What is your good vibe to go?
Well, I took a little different take on this, and I couldn't narrow myself down to more than a few things I wanted to leave your audience with. First of all, in the wake of recent world events and of course the U.S. election, it's become even more sensitive and difficult to talk about issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I really want to encourage your audience not to give up on having those conversations. It's so important. And to also, while you're having those conversations, try to stay open to understanding different perspectives. Because I recently had a conversation with a very old and dear friend of mine who, is Jewish and is adamant in her support for Israel. And I was really surprised at how she was just really enraged about how the Biden administration has handled the Israeli conflict. And, but it was educational for me to understand her perspective. And I hope that I was able to widen her perspective a little as well, because I was not at all disagreeing with her points, but adding to them by saying, okay, great. What about the other side of the equation, right?
Yeah.
What about the innocent civilians in Gaza that are trapped in the middle of this, And I think those are the difficult conversations that they're not always comfortable, but if we stop having them, especially with the people who are, in our lives and close to us, then what chance do we have of really making broader change if we don't have the guts to have those conversations with people we love, Yeah. So do keep having those conversations and try to clear up, any misinformation or lack of understanding that you can. And I always suggest, the more you can personalize and keep things simple language, the better, because you can do that. You can bring things home to folks a lot easier than with statistics if you have personal examples,
Yeah. Storytelling matters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then secondly, something I used to always tell my students that I wanted to share is, we get sometimes worried that, who am I? I'm just one person. What can I do to fight all of this injustice and make the world a better place? And I loved sharing with them examples of things that you can do in your everyday life that really just involve common courtesy and consideration, So, I've noticed times, for example, when I'm in line at a coffee shop and, maybe there's a shorter person or a quiet person of color in front of me who's not being noticed, and they turn to me and ask for my order, I can say, this person was ahead of me. Can you please take their order first? Right. Or make sure that they've had a chance to order if I'm not sure. Little things like that can make a big difference in just combating those everyday injustices. And then lastly, I love encouraging folks to just try on their own little anthropology hat. And just be curious and learn more about the world. If you have the opportunity to travel, even better to go experience the world. And the holidays is a great time to do that because there's so many different cultural activities happening that you can learn about, teach your kids about, share with your family, and really celebrate both the similarities and the differences that we have across cultures.
Great advice. I love those tips. And I think that it's a really great time to find common ground, even if you're not traveling, even asking someone an open-ended question like, do you celebrate any holidays this time of year, can be a great conversation starter. So absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. And how can folks get in touch with you?
Oh, you can easily find me on LinkedIn and just message me there. So, and I'm sure you have the spelling. Oh, you've got the spelling of my name right here. Yeah. So.
Perfect. We'll make sure folks have that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.